Good evening, everyone. My name is Charles Coleman. I am the film program director here at FACETS Multimedia, an independent exhibition venue located in Chicago, founded in 1975. And we've been committed since that time period to bringing the world to your doorstep. And film festivals, culture, we are deep believers in the world of the arts that communicates to the world around us that we have more similarities that bring us together than the differences that divide us. We have a new project called In Focus, Asian American film and its media representation, which is our flagship means to allow us to know what's happening in the new world of how Asian American film has become to the forefront. In terms of recent films that are nominated for the Oscar, particularly Minari, as well as the film Nomadland. This program has been recorded and it will be available immediately after the screening. FACETS is on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at FACETS Chicago. And we also have a Children's National Film Festival. And also at the same time, we have a bunch of other programs that are going to be when we reopen sometime this summer. I would like to introduce our distinguished panel of guests. The first is Mia Park, who's an actress. She's also a yoga instructor, also a native Chicagoan, fun person to be around. She's been in a number of projects in Chicago. There's also Jenny Shih, who is a video journalist, filmmaker, and she's directed a remarkable film called Finding Yin Yang, a documentary about a tragic incident at the University of Illinois Champaign. She has received all these awards she received are well regarded, and I'm really glad to have her here for this event. There's also Miriam Mashani, who is assistant professor of women and gender studies, as well as Asian American culture at the University of Illinois at Champaign. And she's also a filmmaker and an anthropologist. So welcome, Miriam. And there's also our good friend, Michael Phillips, who's the film critic at Chicago Tribune. He's been there since 2006. And he's also has a part of a broadcast called Film Spotting. He's done lectures around the city at various colleges, universities. And we're certainly glad to have him as our friendly companion and fellow cinephile here for this opening project. Welcome to our distinguished panel. So the first thing I'd like to ask is, does anyone have any opening opinions about how Asian Americans have been represented in recent years? Because in the 1990s, there was actually a surge in how Asian films had come into the movie platform. But after the accolades have been accrued to Minari and to Nomadland, one wonders, would this be something that would be sustainable? And I'd like to ask the first question to Miriam, because as an anthropologist, maybe she has detected certain cultural traits, certain signs, certain aspects in the way we can kind of detect certain trends as they emerge for our speculation and observation.
Well, thank you, Charles, and hello, everyone, and thank you for inviting me to this conversation. Yeah, when I got the invitation and we were thinking about the sort of the small proliferation of Asian American films right now and the attention to them, I did think back to the 90s and earlier periods of a lot of Asian American film production, and then there's, been a trickling here and there And this is just, of course, in terms of like a mainstream Hollywood scene, right? I think Asian Americans have been making films for decades and have continued to do it in the shadows, maybe, in independent cinema and film festivals, on public television and things like that, and more experimental work as well. So I think that's been consistent, regardless of if anyone was paying attention, sort of beyond a small, very dedicated group of us. And, you know, I think I wish I could be more optimistic. I think it's always great when we have films that kind of get through and reach wider audiences. I've seen both Minari and Nomadland, and I really like both those films. And also just in terms of seeing how I think Korean Americans in particular have really responded to that film. And I think there's also a really wonderful intergenerational thing happening there. So in some ways, I think there is a coming of age, but we've seen this coming of age before. And so I'm hoping this means that there will be more opportunities for Asian American filmmakers to make all sorts of films. But we'll see. I always hedge a little bit because I've seen this story before.
Well, Jenny, how do you feel about this? Because a lot of times the media finds a means for which they'll locate the shortest path to establish a platform to convey certain ideas. And do you think there's any breathing room given this resurgence of how Asian American films are at the moment come to the forefront? Do you think this is going to be challenged to tell authentic stories, or there'll be something where there'll be a reset and then Hollywood might revert back to its old values prior to this resurrection?
Yeah, so for me, so first of all, I came to the US in 2016, so I can only speak about my experience, after I arrived here. So, I mean, definitely just being an Asian filmmaker in the US, it's still very difficult to tell authentic stories about Asian experience or Asian American experience. And also, it's very difficult to get distributed. And for Finding Ying itself, we are very lucky that MTV documentary films, they pick up the film. And right now we have different platforms. Right now it's on Paramount Plus. And I talked to, some other Asian American filmmakers, talk about the landscape and industry and what's going on we are experiencing right now. They just told me that, like, if this film was made like 5 years ago, they couldn't imagine that a distributor would pick up a film like this. So I just feel like, definitely there are some opportunities out there, and the industry, they're kind of, being aware of the issue going on. But I'm not sure because, it's still just happening. It's just still happening, last year they picked up Finding Ying. And now I'm developing my next feature documentary. It's gonna be about Chinese American experience. I'm not sure, how much support I would get, even though with one film I've already completed, but I still feel, it's very competitive to get the resources to finish the film. And sometimes I would say, people have different definitions about what is an Asian American film, what is Asian American experience. Because for Finding Ying, the story is about a Chinese girl who went missing in the US, and her family, came here and searched for her. So when I applied for grant, I got a lot of feedbacks, and some of them, they asked, whether, this is about Asian American experience. They don't feel the story is American enough. And at first I was asking myself, Ying Ying herself coming here as an international student, is her experience about Asian American experience? I asked myself, this question before, but later on, I do feel, it's about Asian American experience, because what she experienced as a foreigner living in the US. That is, I think, what exactly a lot of immigrants, when they first move here, what they've experienced. And also for Ying Ying, even though, we don't know whether she had a plan to stay in the US, but a lot of, I would say, Asian Americans and other immigrants, they came here as students. So that's definitely related to Asian American experience. Yeah, but anyways, I just can't predict the future. But I try to stay positive. As a filmmaker, I can only stay positive. And that's, one of the reasons can really push me forward to pursue stories that I want to tell. Yeah.
Well, hey, Michael, as Jenny alluded to, when you want to tell a narrative, you look at a film like Minari, which is as American as it can get. You have a family immigrated from South Korea, and they trying to establish themselves to the American dream. And even though it's fantastic, that's been nominated for 6 Oscars, I believe, at this point. But one wonders, would this be a spotlight that will open doors for other stories to emerge from this? Because you already have the situation by which a film like Farewell, Crazy Rich Asians, for example, and then you have Nomadland. And what's interesting about that continuum is that you have 2 films that have done very robustly and performed well in the marketplace. And then you get 2 independent films like Nomadland and also with Minari. And the Minari is also, half the film is in Korean. And 2 of the actors are very well known in South Korea, but they're not, hopefully become big names here. So what's your feel about that? Because as Jenny indicated, 5 years ago, it would have difficult for her to finding Ying Ying, and then hopefully her circumstances in making her next film have improved considerably. So what do you think about the Oscar aspect? Would that make things more accessible, or would that be new challenges?
Yeah, they break your heart every year, even if they don't, Oscars. But first of all, it's thank you so much for having me on, and Jenny, Mia, Miriam, good to meet you all. And Jenny, I had a great experience. The first workshop we did with this year's U of I Roger Ebert Fellows was around your documentary, and to talk to 3 young women, all very different, and also an Ebert Fellow from last year who was back in China finishing up her schoolwork, about this story that hit him so close to home, because it was such a U of I story. It was really just a really bracing way to start the new year, and such a good film. So thank you for that. The only thing that's worth talking about the Oscars really is some years they get it more right than others, and eventually they'll get it a little more right a few years in a row, and we'll stop writing the same about is this the breakthrough for da 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 da. It happened with African American actors a few years ago when they actually deigned to award a couple of awards to a less than lily white crowd, and that went away suddenly. This is the time when Oscar campaigning, such as it is this year in the pandemic, and this I find dodgy and kind of condescending. They can't pull any quotes or language about things like Minari, without stressing it's a universal story. It's not just an ethnic, is the implication. And it's very much pitched to kind of the reluctant Anglo audience, and that just pisses me off. This is, these films have to be particular if they're any good at all, and if they're going to get to universality. Any film has to just tell its story the right way for the set of characters and the story that's being told, and the rest of it cannot start smacking calculation to reach a broader audience. I just resist it. And if I resist it as as a white middle-aged film critic, then I can think that if Menotti didn't have, more than a kernel of specificity and truth about how they're going to tell, okay, this story, this Korean American family, this time in this place, then it would be like nobody in particular made it instead of Lee Isaac Chung or anybody. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. So.
Well, it seems like institutions endorse this idea about the very low risk takers. They seem to reinforce the ideology of making sure that we stay in existence. So therefore, why embrace something new? So they keep reinforcing the same precepts because there's almost a built-in insecurity about how long they're going to last, which suppresses diversity. And I think the Oscars, in some ways, are emblematic of this particular belief system. And I think, as you just pointed out, there may be the occasional anomaly, like with Moonlight by Barry Jenkins, for example. But the very next year, the exact opposite film got chosen to also win the
right.
Oscar.
Yeah.
I mean,
exactly.
They reverted back to form. It's almost like they clawed back and reset themselves to what they always want to endorse. And I'm just wondering, with this recent group of films, would that be a breakthrough, or would that be a fight back to their own version of what they see as a normal way of operating in Hollywood? Mia, as an actress, have you? I can only imagine that, as resourceful as you have been, you've done theater. You're obviously quite a yoga instructor, maybe a yogapreneur, perhaps, and you've done a lot of work in Chicago with with Chicago Fire, Chicago PD. What's the other Chicago? Chicago Med. So have you actually, not that we want you to spill any state secrets, but have you been anything recently that in terms of this emergence of Asian American culture, which is entirely positive, has anything you faced that you can relate to us about something when you're on personal experience?
Well, I have first of all, thanks. Hi, everybody. Nice to meet all of you. I look forward to being able to sit down across a table and have some tea or something. So I'm honored to be asked. Thank you, everyone. I have been professionally acting based out of Chicago for 21 years. And I have to tell you that I've been doing theater for 15, 17 years or something in Chicago. I have been rarely called in for non-Asian roles. On stage, I've only done one play that wasn't specifically Asian character. Just one play at the Goodman. That was it. Every other time I'm called in is for someone Asian. I think I've been called in for other roles. I didn't book them. Maybe that just speaks to me not being right for the role, but I'm not called in enough to be a non-Asian character in the theater world. Now, as that relates to TV and film, I was lucky enough to play a regular character on Chicago Med for 5 seasons. I was a nurse. And in my mind, I joked that I was Asian nurse because, it's a medical real life drama, and this is TV, and there are Asian. My mother's a retired nurse, so she got a kick out of every time I sent her pictures of myself looking like her, which is weird in another way. But anyway, the point is, like, after I was left the show, my friend, who is an Asian actress, became what in my mind, I'm like, oh no, she's Asian nurse. And so I want to be fair and say that shows like TV shows on the smaller screens are doing a better job of representation. And all props to the Chicago franchise. I do think that they're trying. The needle is barely being pushed, though, across the board, barely. God forbid there's too many Asian characters in any one show, right? Mm-hmm. If you've got the show of real life, say an inner city hospital, in an inner city hospital like Chicago, there can only be one Asian doctor and maybe 1 or 2 Asian nurses. There's this kind of idea that Asians have to be represented as just this kind of, I'm going to say maybe sometimes like a token, mm-hmm. or that it's just not a true reflection of what's going on. my biggest gripe about small screen TVs that made me stop watching the series actually was Handmaid's Tale. And I loved the book when that came out. I stopped after somewhere at season 2 because I thought, gosh, if this is dystopia in the future, that's weird that there's no Asian people. Where did we go? What happens to me in 5 years in that world? You know, I saw one Asian girl. I mean, I look for these things on big screens and little screens and on stage. And I saw one Asian woman who was running. And I said, oh, that's where we go. We're little kids and then we run. We don't talk. We don't have major roles. We don't have interesting characters that are depicted about us. Now, if we reflect that out to the bigger, I stopped watching the show because I lost interest. I don't see me in it. This is not my world. And I don't understand why filmmakers, and thank you, Mariam and Jenny, for doing the work that you do. I don't understand why filmmakers can't think of Asian Americans or just Asian faces and personalities and all the rich character work we could bring as artists to the screens as being something valuable. And that we need, and I believe this is what Michael was talking about, we need gangbuster like shows that yell, I am Asian, in order to get recognized, like Crazy Rich Asians or Throwback the Joy Luck Club. So we need these shows that are, or like Minari, right? We need these shows that are like so deliberately Asian American to make the needle move a tiny bit. So with Mariam, what you were saying, I agree. I remember in the late 90s, it was like, oh, wow, Justin Lin busted out with Better Luck Tomorrow. And there's all these great, like, wow, you know, and that was actually before I started acting professionally. I just thought, well, look at all these Asians in film. And then there was kind of not a lot of activity.
Well, it seems like that's what's happening with what you just described. Seems to be deja vu all over again when you had The Farewell and with Crazy Rich Asians. They're feeling there's an all Asian cast, the same thing with Minari. And you've actually just well outlined that there's a reversion back to let's just have just enough people so we can address almost not necessarily a quota, but we can just say we're going to be diverse, but with limitations. And you know, I can't imagine how that makes you feel, but like you just said, we actually have to have the right optics to notice these omissions, because they just presume that once you see a particular representative in a certain well-funded project, it will mean that, well, we won't have to hear from that group about claiming we're not representing them because we've met the league minimum. So it's just, and as Michael was alluding to earlier, and Jenny, when you see some contemporary films, because I know you've done, your work is actually about social justice and also about certain things that people certainly should be aware of in terms of important milestones within the culture. What is, I know, I presume you're a full-time filmmaker, because I know you originally went to school to become a journalist, and now you seem to be combining both journalism and filmmaker. So just based on what Mia just said, have you noticed some sort of these sort of precepts and the things you've observed around you?
Yeah, so for me, actually, I came here to study journalism. I went to journalism school and actually work as a journalist, as a video journalist at first. And then I started to make Funny Ying Ying. And I think I can speak about, you know, both working as a journalist and a documentary filmmaker, and how we cover, you know, Asian stories and Asian American stories. So again, I just feel like right now it's just, I mean, even in the past few years, it's just very difficult to attract attention from mainstream media to these kind of stories. When I first graduated, I worked at a newsroom, Chicago, a community newsroom in the west, on the west side of Chicago, and I primarily covered stories in Chicago Chinatown. So I wrote story about Chinatowns, but I just feel like it's very difficult to, you know, to successfully, you know, pitch the stories to mainstream media. And some of my friends, they later on, we all realized, you know, this problem. And I started to, you know, get interested in documentary filmmaking. And we started to think about whether we should just start our like own like platform. That was actually we were planning on at that time. So we like three of us, we planned a lot, and we did survey and send it out to a lot of friends and you know, people who might be interested in the digital magazine we are going to launch. And I do feel, you know, there is a need, you know, from the community to, you know, learn about, you know, Asian stories, Asian American stories. But again, you know, if you step out from those, you know, outlets that specifically reporting on Asian Americans, just think about like mainstream medias. There are still like few slots for these stories. We ended up like not like make the magazine because we feel like we just don't have enough experience, and we decided to, you know, work for like news outlets first. So two of my friends right now, they are working at two Chicago newsrooms as full-time reporters, and they did feel like it's very difficult to pitch Asian stories and Asian American stories to their editors. They always got no from them. So some of them actually, you know, think about like leave journalism and to figure out other way to tell stories. So, you know, just speak about what Mia just said. You know, sometimes you do feel certain productions or even like newsroom, they try to fill the quota, and that's it. So I just feel like in the future, we definitely need to kind of like push the boundary, even as, you know, storytellers, Asian storytellers and Asian American storytellers. I just feel like we shouldn't stop. If the editor, they don't pick up our stories, our story ideas, we should figure out other ways to basically increase the visibility of these kind of stories. And again, like think about the Atlanta shooting. You know, after that, I suddenly saw a lot of like news organizations, they are seeking Asian stories and Asian American stories, right? So I just feel like, you know, right now this incident just happened, and now like everyone's attention is on this incident. But I'm still afraid that maybe like weeks later and a month later, everything just goes back to what it was, you know, what it was. And I think that's just like similar to the film. You just said like in the 90s, there was a surge, but right now we kind of, you know, like slow down, and then like after a certain period of time, this happened again. I'm not sure whether there's a way, you know, to change it systematically. Yeah, I just don't know. But as a storyteller myself, I will not stop telling Asian American stories. This is, you know, where my passion is. And I think beyond that, I'm also interested in tell stories that that tells shared humanity and compassion. So it's not just about Asian, but definitely, you know, I will talk more stories about Asians. Yeah.
Well, the tragic thing is you just noted that there seems to be an affiliation within some sections of the media going toward sort of a tabloid zeal for the sensational. Like, for example, the xenophobia and the violence against Asian communities in recent months has certainly exacerbated interest from the media. But as you just pointed out, where's these stories about humanity, compassion, and empathy? And Michael, one of the other striking factors is that the Asian American community is actually a powerful economic force, and they see, as Mia pointed out, there's a discernible mark of private interests where they can develop their own, in terms of Hollywood. There's a motive for them to have these stories be told. And unfortunately, why is it so elusive that the more specific something is, the more people it actually appeals to? Now, do you think there's any chance of this, how do they stay in the room? Because what the temptation is, okay, now we're in the screenwriting room, we can now cast Asian actors. But I've been reading these stories about what Asian actors have to do to stay in a room. Like, do they have to fall into a certain stereotype, adopt a certain accent, in order to be in this? Stephen Young said after he was doing the Walking Dead series, he had the financial luxury to turn projects down so he could do a film like Minari, because that's all he was getting from in order to continue to stay employed.
It's, I mean, this is just simple as key, and everyone has said it, but it's just simply a matter of getting every level of filmmaking, film financing, all of it has to change so that there's a plurality of voices being listened to. I mean, we have to get to the point where the people who are standing in the way of a broader range of stories reaching full financing and getting some backing are just simply ignored, gotten out of the way. You know, it's the same thing with. It's right next door to the kind of behavior you read about with Scott Rudin in the news, the big producer who's, you know, Mr. Broadway and Mr. Hollywood, and you know. He may very well bounce back just fine from this little mini scandal, because to date, his issues aren't anything to do with sexual assault or harassment. They're just simply complete asshole behavior. And, you know, that's Hollywood in a nutshell. And then usually that means you get your knuckles rapped and then you're back on top. We'll see about that. But what I'm so impatient right now with, even just on an economic level. Look at what Lulu Wang did with The Farewell. It took way too long to get that thing backed, and it made money. So I just believe that until Hollywood rediscovers, and maybe this is the one good thing that comes out of this pandemic in terms of mainline old line Hollywood financing. Maybe what I'm saying is that maybe we're never going to, I don't know if we're ever going to undo the Wall Street stockholder, Disney, Warner Brothers, Paramount sort of imperative to make another $200 million movie in a proven franchise. And as long as it makes 800 million or more, they'll get into profit, and then that'll keep that machine going. But there's enough people now, there's enough Ava DuVernays and other folks who I just think are gaining traction, all kinds, all different levels of production, where they see the monetary value of just a lot of seed money on low, medium budget pictures, all kinds of new people, proven, unproven, every kind, every sort of picture. It's how the horror genre stays so healthy no matter what the hell else is going on, because they spend a certain amount and they make a ton. And that's, I mean, if Lulu Wang can do it with Farewell, if Minari can do it, if Finding Ying Ying can find a distribution, which it damn well deserved, then something, is being proven right before our eyes, and we just have to get the hell out of the way of it. Let me just say one other thing, and then I'll shut up. It's very hard to say this with a clear conscience, because I'm a white male critic in a field lousy with white male critics, laden with them, and it's not a comfortable sensation to feel, my luxury of privilege from being able to kind of see as much as I can, but for every one of me, there's somebody else who's not getting the megaphone, that I enjoy. At the same time, our paper is contracting like crazy. We used to have, money we could spend to bring in different freelance writers locally that we wanted to encourage, and frankly, who we needed to just simply broaden our perspectives and get different voices out there. That's all gone. It's been gone for years. And for me, long distance in my old paper, the Los Angeles Times, to see Patrick Soon-Shiong take over a couple of years ago and somehow back the hiring of 100 new journalists in that room, mostly of color. And we had, we hired 6, I think, and we lost about 15 people of color just because it's a tough place to work if you're a person of color. That's hard. And that's a very tough set of circumstances to overcome for people who are trying to get in and get some work published, and for people trying to hold their head up about the place they work. That's hard. So,
well, you normally get a consortium of investors that look to plunder a resource until they exhaust it. And that's what you're describing happened to the Tribune. And unfortunately, it depends on this institute and like intestinal fortitude by people like Jenny or Lulu Wang with The Farewell, to have the steadfastness and ambition against a lot of resistance to fulfill their particular artistic vision, which is an intimidating challenge. And thankfully, there's these occasional ambitions that are fulfilled in spite of what the marketplace demands from these investors. Now, Miriam, when you think about this sort of thing with women and gender studies, do you think this whole thing about being underrepresented is something that's been culturally viable simply because it's been efficient for our society? Or do we wait for an evolutionary paradigm shift to magically turn things around?
I mean, it's not going to be magic. I will say that. I mean, I think Michael speaks to what we're talking about here. It's like institutionally, the system, like the Hollywood system, journalism. I mean, they're all still, I think everyone's at the top is looking for ways to diversify, but not getting out of the way, right? And so I think at some point, if to use Michael as an example, because you mentioned it, Mike, like there will come a point where if people are really serious about hearing a multiplicity of voices, they're going to have to really think seriously about what it means to take up less space, right? To give up space, to, really do the kind of mentorship that needs to happen in these places to, and also like this is something we talk about in the university. They're constantly looking for ways to do more diversity and inclusion and equity. And all we keep saying is we just need more of us here. Right. And not just one, right? As Mia's talking about, we don't want just one token, and because it's hard to survive as the token, right? And Michael was also speaking to that, right? So what we are trying to do is like cluster hires. So you actually bring in a whole cohort of people to make films together, to be in conversation with each other. And I think that's what Ava's been doing, right? Just building up cohorts of people of color, women of color who can make films together, right? And talk about the challenges of being in the industry, so that they actually have support, because you actually need a lot of support to do this work, and to stay in it, right? Like I remember when I discovered Julie Dash's Daughters of the Dust, I was just like waiting. I was like, where's the next film? Like, because she's an amazing filmmaker,
And that was her only film that she was able to make.
right. And same with is it Cassie Lemons from Eve's Bayou? Like, yeah, I mean, that was an amazing film. And like it took her years to make another film after that, right? And meanwhile, we have like tons of people who, usually white men, young white men, who make a flop, then get to make another film and then make another film, right? And it's over and over again. And so I think the chances aren't, maybe a one chance is there, but that second chance is not always there, right? And so, yeah, so I think there's a lot of infrastructural changes that actually need to be made. At the same time, I also like have been seeing really great stuff on alternative, formats, right? My students talk about how, they didn't have enough Asian American men to sort of look up to. So they started, going to TikTok, right? And other, in social media. And so those are where their role models are. And I do want to say that Charles Yu's Interior Chinatown, the novel, speaks to all these things that we've been talking about. Mia, when you were talking about Asian nurse, I mean, that's his whole introduction is sort of the stock characters.
Well, we have a couple of questions in our chat. So let's see what our audience has posed in terms of questions. Is the chat coming up? Okay. Where is it up here? Yeah. Oh. We have one question is, and I will leave it to anyone here who wants to take the opportunity to answer this query. How are the shapes of various Asian stories different from the standard American assimilation narrative? Anyone?
I can answer that. You know, that I think that's an interesting question. I would actually want to know the intention of the person who asked that, because I wonder why it has to be different. I've seen a lot of reviews about Minari saying that their immigrant story is the universal story, and it happens to have a Korean immigrant narrative to that particular story. I think that the universality that we all share is important, and I think seeing that universality reflected in all the different beautiful human shapes and forms that we come in is what keeps it universal and helps us relate to ourselves and others. So how specifically does the Asian American narrative relate differently? We have, I would say specifically, so that's kind of one side of it. I think to specifically answer the question, we have this facade of the model minority put on us, which was like, I think, was it the 70s or 80s? And that book was written. And I believe it was written by an American white male who imposed this idea that Asian immigrants are the better thans. And of course, that was divisive. That was a white supremacist device to put Asian populations against other brown and immigrant populations, putting us on this like almost as good as white people pedestal. So I think that kind of stereotype is unique to the Asian American experience, and that stories being told that humanize. This, of course, I'm talking in huge generalizations. I mean, Asian America is huge. There's so many, you know, it's just kind of ridiculous term to try to blanket all that. But I think that because we're kind of coming into the narrative, the collective narrative we have of the stereotype, that's pretty unique to us. Thanks.
Yeah, I think that's actually a salient point, because one of the things I was fairly hopeful about with this new spotlight is that you would hope that people could relate to Asian American narratives, because why can't it come to the point where it's just you have a friend or you know someone who just happens to be Asian without even making these distinctions at all? It just should be a good film is a good film is a good film. And but as Michael pointed out, there's just this there's almost just a furious resistance that Hollywood, which seems to be a verb in many ways as opposed to just a concept, that, you know, why should we change when we're so successful? So it's almost like, well, this is like a temporary situation. This happens to emerge to our advantage. And then we're just going to wait until we take every opportunity to draw funding from it, and then we'll just move on to the next platform. And Jenny, how optimistic are you about just the future of? I mean, for example, you chose documentary as your film form, which in many ways is actually a very expansive arena, because documentaries have actually been, and this is actually a very positive thing, a showcase for, as long as you can make a documentary about almost any subject. It's just a famous line by Flaubert, if you look at something long enough, it becomes interesting. And you've actually gone into this area, you know, making your own way, finding your own voice, meeting your own challenges. And so after you made Finding Yin Yang, was there a light bulb moment where you thought this is what I should do? And documentary is a perfect format for me to express myself as an artist?
Yeah, so actually I would say like, I have two answers, to this question. First of all, like documentary is definitely the art form I like. And I feel like I can utilize it to tell more compelling stories. But if you ask me about whether I'm going to, say 100%, I'm going to pursue a career as an independent documentary filmmaker, I have a question mark on that. So to be honest, like,
Right.
after I finished like my first film, I was like relieved at first because it took me so difficult to finish the first film. I know like a lot of filmmakers, they have funding issues and distribution issues, but me as a foreigner staying in the US, I need to figure out my visa. I need to figure out other side of my life. So it was very difficult, and we applied for different grants. We actually didn't really get any. We didn't really get any of them. We did get one grant, which came very, very late in post-production stage. So we almost finished the film. So I think I just like for maybe almost 2 years in production, I just took money out of my pockets and I did it. And now right now the film has distribution, and I know it's more like a gamble. You know what I mean. So I don't really know when I was making the film. I don't really know whether I can get the film distributed. One of the reasons why I want to make this film is that I really want to help the subject of the film. So there's another like human connection, personal relationship about why I want to make documentary. But for my next project, right now I'm still writing a grant, writing proposals, applying for grant, God knows, from funders. So I feel like I'm doing everything, like from scratch all over again. And actually, Marianne, you just said, like white young, male directors, once they finish like the first film and they got to make like the second and the third and the film. Actually, I heard about that from some other filmmakers. They had same feelings. So I'm not sure, I'm right now I'm still, navigating my own path. I don't want to give up, think about, I don't want to give up just because, the big environment is like this. I still try to, navigate my own way to tell the story. Maybe, next year you ask me the same question, I will give you a better answer. Yeah.
Well, it's just interesting how why should authenticity be something that's in jeopardy? I mean, that's something that kind of validates your humanity. And also, why can't communities communicate with each other in such a way where everybody benefits from it? And that can come in different ways. It can come through literature, poetry, music, and also film. And but as you just pointed out, Jenny, it's so daunting that what you have to do in order to find the means to fulfill something that would benefit everyone and also be rewarding to what you want to do as a artistic person. But it's so discouraging because of all the roadblocks that you face. And Michael, when it comes to what you just talked about, the Tribune, with all these business people attempting to contract the Tribune as a newspaper and as a viable institution for communicating as the fourth estate. Like how what are your feelings about that? Because you must feel like your ability as a critic to write and expound on things in a robust way with passion and with enthusiasm must be under constant threat.
Yeah, it is, but it's part of it's just my own neuroses and insecurities, I guess, which I could, but you just have to you just have to take a cue, I think, from the people around you, and usually they're a lot younger. And I'd love to ask Miriam this question. What little I'm teaching at work with students at the U of I on the fellowship, and I teach at DePaul. And every time I get in the room and there's any decent issue being debated or discussed in any way, anything that's got anything to do with what's happening in the world right now and how it intersects with our screen lives, the attitude of almost every type of student is the opposite of what a lot of the air I've been breathing for years. They're just like, get out of my way, just give me the chance and move on. Don't, and it is exactly right. I mean, some of them have their own strategies about how to make that work, but the impatience is backed up by serious commitment to keeping their eyes open to the world they're living in right now and everything wrong with it and how they can make it better. One film at a time, one story at a time, whatever. And if you can't find it at that place, screw it, go on to the next one. Find somebody who can, who has your back, who can be some sort of supporter and get you working. It's easier said than done, but I'd love to hear what you have to say, Miriam, just about if there's sort of a student, if there's just sort of an increasing level of, I don't know if anybody under the age of 25 really cares about the Oscars doing a little better by Asian Americans this year. I mean, does it even hit the needle, for them? It's more just like, well, give me a chance to make my work and let's go.
Yeah, I mean, I'm over 25 and I wasn't even paying attention to the Oscars, and I used to work for the Academy. So, yeah, and I think it comes from, Charles, what you started with in terms of just like sometimes they might get it kind of right and the next year they don't. And, they keep trying and they are making a sincere effort, but it seems like they just want to celebrate the stories that make them feel good, right? And then make them
Right.
feel like they're solving racism, you know? So yeah, and so I could see why everyone under 25 is like, yeah, we've got our other avenues. Like we're not aiming for this anymore, right? And thank goodness, I think that they've learned that. But if these institutions want to maintain relevance, right, they kind of got to get with the program. So we'll see. Otherwise, they kind of write their own obsolescence at a certain point. I mean, the economy will probably still stick around the industry, but it's also changing so fast. So I don't know, right?
And in some ways, very conspicuously for the better. I think, especially on small screens, as Mia said.
Yeah, I think one of my favorite Asian American things I saw all this past year was Pen 15, which is sort of Asian American. It's one of the best television, some of the best television I saw this past year. And I don't know if they got any taps for anything.
Well, it seems like the small screen is more flexible and more responsive because they're not, they have no fealty to a pre-existing institution. I mean, I know that companies like Netflix and Amazon are certainly giants in the landscape, but they've given considerable maneuvering room to a lot of filmmakers because they need content. And that drive for content has enabled other people to participate in an environment in which they can express themselves, because them being against each other, sort of like this mega battle, inexplicably you get this enrichment of almost like a cultural bonus because of the competition between these likewise institutions. And unfortunately, Hollywood is more staid, is more fixed, is less apt to move, is almost like a dinosaur in many ways, fighting against its own extinction. And so therefore, that means they're going to be less likely to do something provocative or innovative. And they need a cultural intervention, I think, but they're going to do what they can and do it as long as they can. But the small screen, I think, has been very remarkable in many ways. So I think we can now regretfully have to close off this discussion, which I think this has been I think this has been an exuberant exercise in artistic aesthetics. And I think this discussion has been I'm very impressed with the participants here. So hopefully we can return for another engagement at some point. So thank you, Jenny, Miriam, Michael, and Mia.
Thank you. Do you mind if I just say, Michael, thank you so much for being an ally. I heard what Mariam said, and I'm sorry, is it Mariam or Miriam? I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly.
I take both.
Thank you, Mariam. And well, Michael, thank you for being an ally and for recognizing the importance of your place, because we need faces and people like you to talk to other people that can relate to you better than the other faces on the screen here. But also thank you for recognizing that you're in a fortunate place for many different reasons. So thanks.
Thank you. Near the end, I'm sure, but all I can do is go down, championing what I can do, and really thank you all for the work. It's not, and just for the education, both given and received. So I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, I really feel privileged to have shared time with all of you, and you have my deepest gratitude. And I'm really pleased that we all of us got together for this conversation. So thanks again, and hope to see you all soon.
Thank you.
Thank you, Charles.
Thank you, Charles.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye, all.
Bye.
Bye.
Well, this is our foray into the world of what will be a series of projects coming up called In Focus. I'd like to thank the audience for tuning in to this special event, and I hope you enjoyed the conversation. I was entirely pleased and satisfied with the imagination and the spirited interaction by our participants. This, as I said earlier, you can see this this is being recorded, so you can pass on to your friends and loved ones afterwards, as soon as probably end of this evening. We'd also like to say that FACETS will be reopening sometime this summer. We have a virtual cinema that we've stayed in business during this pandemic and the also shelter in place. We also like to indicate that we're going to be on this YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And also, I'll also like to indicate that we are going to continue our mission as hopefully perceived as a cultural force in Chicago. And we will have upcoming projects in the near and very far flung future. So thanks again for joining us for this special event. And I hope you have a good evening, and thanks for coming.